morning sun painted the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace in golden hues as Marcus Thompson stepped off the tour bus. He was a wealthy businessman from Texas, used to getting what he wanted with a flash of his credit card. His expensive camera hung around his neck, and his designer suit screamed money from every thread. Marcus had traveled halfway around the world for this moment. He wanted the perfect photograph to hang in his office back home, something that would impress his business partners and show off his wealth. But not just any tourist photo would do. He wanted something special, something exclusive, as he approached the famous red-uniformed guards standing motionless at their posts. An idea formed in his mind. These guards were legendary for never moving, never speaking, never breaking their perfect stance. But Marcus believed everyone had a price. In his world of corporate deals and expensive negotiations, money always talked. The guard he chose was young, probably in his early 20s, with sharp blue eyes that stared straight ahead. His red tunic was perfectly pressed. His black bearskin hat stood tall and proud. And his rifle remained perfectly still in his white-gloved hands. The nameplate on his uniform read, Private James Mitchell. Marcus circled around the guard like a predator studying its prey. Other tourists snapped photos from a respectful distance, but Marcus wanted more. He wanted the guard to break character, to smile, to pose with him. He wanted bragging rights that no one else could claim. "Listen here," Soldier Marcus whispered, stepping closer than the safety barriers allowed. "I know you can hear me. I've got a proposition for you." Private Mitchell's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, his face as still as marble. But Marcus noticed the slightest twitch in the guard's jaw. Good, he thought. The man was listening. "I'm willing to pay good money for a simple favor," Marcus continued, his voice low but confident. "Just break that robot act for 30 seconds. Smile for a photo with me. Maybe give me a salute. I'll make it worth your while." The guard's breathing remained steady and controlled. Marcus was convinced he saw interest flickering in those blue eyes. After all, how much could a soldier possibly earn? A few $100s would probably seem like a fortune to someone like this. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. It was thick with cash. He always carried plenty when traveling. The crisp bills rustled as he counted them, making sure the sound was loud enough for the guard to hear. $500, Marcus announced quietly, holding up the money just within the guard's peripheral vision. American dollars. That's probably more than you make in a month, right? All you have to do is break character for 1 minute. Give me that photo, and this money is yours. But Private Mitchell remained as still as a statue. His breathing didn't change, his posture didn't shift, and his eyes never moved from their fixed position. It was as if Marcus wasn't even there. The lack of response only fueled Marcus's determination. In his business world, initial refusal was just part of the negotiation process. Everyone had a breaking point, and he was determined to find this guard's price. Other tourists began to notice the well-dressed American man standing too close to the guard, whispering and waving money around. Some looked disapproving, others seemed curious about what would happen next. A few started taking photos of the unusual scene, sensing that something interesting was about to unfold. Marcus glanced around nervously. He hadn't expected an audience, but he was too invested now to back down. His reputation as a man who always got what he wanted was at stake. Besides, he reasoned, what harm could there be in offering money to a guard? It wasn't like he was asking the man to abandon his post or reveal state secrets. "Look, I understand you have to play hard to get," Marcus said, his voice taking on a slightly harder edge. "But let's be realistic here. You're standing out here in the heat, barely moving. For what? Minimum wage? I'm offering you easy money for 30 seconds of work." The guard's silence was beginning to frustrate Marcus more than he cared to admit. In boardrooms across America, his negotiation skills were legendary. He could convince anyone to see things his way, to accept his offers, to bend to his will. But this young soldier, in his fancy uniform, was proving to be unexpectedly stubborn. Marcus decided to up the ante. He pulled out more bills from his wallet, counting them dramatically in front of the guard. The morning breeze caught one of the hundreds and sent it fluttering toward the palace gates, causing several tourists to gasp and point. $1,000, Marcus declared, his voice slightly louder than before. That's my final offer. 1,000 American dollars for one simple photograph? You'd be crazy to turn that down. But Private James Mitchell continued to stare straight ahead, his face betraying no emotion, no interest, no acknowledgement that he had even heard the offer. His duty was clear, his training was complete, and his honor was not for sale at any price. Marcus felt his face growing red with embarrassment and anger. The crowd of tourists around him was getting larger, and he could hear whispered conversations in various languages. Some people were taking photos of him rather than the guard, and he realized he was becoming the spectacle instead of creating one. Fine, you want to play games? Marcus muttered through gritted teeth. $2,000. That's my absolute final offer. He waved the thick bundle of cash closer to the guard's face, close enough that the bills almost brushed against Private Mitchell's perfectly polished buttons. But still the young soldier remained motionless, his eyes focused on some distant point beyond the palace. Gates. Marcus had never encountered such stubborn resistance to money before. In his world, everyone had a price, and he prided himself on always finding it. Corporate executives, government officials, even judges, they all eventually came around when the right amount was offered. But this simple palace guard was proving to be more challenging than a multi-million-dollar merger. Listen carefully, soldier boy, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I know people in high places. Important people. One phone call from me could make your life very difficult. Or very easy. The choice is yours. For the first time since the conversation began, something changed in Private Mitchell's expression. It was subtle, so subtle that only someone standing very close would notice. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and there was a flash of something dangerous in his blue eyes. But his training held firm, and he remained at attention. Marcus mistook this slight reaction for weakness and pressed his advantage. He reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out his business cards, fanning them out like playing cards. Marcus Thompson, Thompson Industries, he announced proudly. Look me up. I own 3 manufacturing plants, 2 shipping companies, and a chain of luxury hotels. I have connections you can't even imagine. Senators, governors, even military brass. The lies came easily to Marcus. While he was indeed wealthy, his influence was greatly exaggerated. But he had learned long ago that perception was often more powerful than reality in negotiations. An elderly British woman in a flowered dress stepped forward from the crowd. Excuse me, sir, she said in a crisp accent, but I don't think you should be bothering the guard like that. These young men are doing their duty. Marcus spun around, his face flushed with anger. Lady, mind your own business. This is between me and him. Actually, said a tall man with a camera around his neck, I think she's right. You're being pretty disrespectful. More voices joined in from the crowd. A teenager with braces spoke up. Dude, he's not going to break character. That's like the whole point.
Yeah.
Leave him alone, added a woman holding a small child's hand. Marcus felt the situation spiraling out of control. What had started as a simple business transaction was turning into a public confrontation. But his pride wouldn't let him back down now, especially not in front of all these witnesses. You people don't understand, Marcus, announced to the crowd, his voice carrying across the courtyard. I'm offering this man serious money. More money than he'll see in years of standing around like a mannequin. I'm trying to help him. Private Mitchell's training included dealing with difficult tourists. Nothing quite like this. He had been on guard duty for over 2 years and had seen everything from marriage proposals to amateur comedians trying to make him laugh. But no one had ever been quite so persistent or so publicly aggressive with their attempts at bribery. The young soldier's mind remained focused on his duty, but he couldn't help thinking about the man's arrogance. Marcus represented everything that Private Mitchell had sworn to protect the monarchy from. The belief that money could buy anything, that traditions could be purchased, that honor was just another commodity. Marcus made one more desperate play. He pulled out his smartphone and began dialing a number. Fine, he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. I'm calling the American Embassy. They'll sort this out real quick. But before he could finish dialing, a new voice cut through the commotion. It was deep, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable tone of military command. "Is there a problem here?" Everyone turned to see a distinguished man in his 50s approaching. His uniform was different from the guards, more elaborate, with additional stripes and decorations that clearly marked him as a senior officer. His steel-gray mustache was perfectly groomed, and his eyes held the kind of authority that comes from decades of military service. "Colonel Harrison," Private Mitchell said quietly. Barely moving his lips, Marcus saw an opportunity and stepped forward eagerly. "Yes, there is a problem. Your guard here is refusing a very generous business proposition. I'm offering him good money for a simple photograph, and he won't even acknowledge me." Colonel Harrison listened patiently, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes moved from Marcus to Private Mitchell to the crowd of tourists, taking in the entire situation with the practiced assessment of a career military officer. "I see," the colonel said slowly. "And you believe that offering money to one of Her Majesty's guards is appropriate behavior?" "It's just business," Marcus replied, though some of his earlier confidence was starting to waver under the colonel's steady gaze. "Everyone benefits. He gets paid, I get my photo. Simple capitalism." The colonel nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Marcus's words carefully. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Colonel Harrison's expression remained perfectly neutral as he studied Marcus Thompson. The American businessman had expected quick support from a fellow authority figure, but something in the colonel's bearing suggested this conversation might not go the way he anticipated. "Simple capitalism," the colonel repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "I see. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, what exactly do you know about the Queen's Guard?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The direct question caught him off guard, but his business instincts kicked in. "Never admit ignorance in a negotiation. They're ceremonial guards," Marcus said with forced confidence. "Tourist attractions, basically. They stand around looking pretty for the cameras. It's all just for show, right?" A murmur rippled through the crowd of tourists. Several British visitors exchanged knowing glances, and a few shook their heads in disapproval. The elderly woman in the flowered dress actually gasped. Audibly, Colonel Harrison's mustache twitched slightly, the only sign of his growing irritation. "Just for show," he repeated. "I see. Private Mitchell, would you care to enlighten our American friend about your background?" For the first time in 20 minutes, Private Mitchell spoke. His voice was clear, crisp, and carried a Welsh accent that had been carefully modulated by military training. "Sir, I am a serving member of the Coldstream Guards, part of the Household Division. I've completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and 6 months of specialized protection training. I am qualified in advanced combat tactics, explosive ordnance disposal, and close protection protocols." Marcus felt his confidence wavering. This wasn't what he had expected to hear. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. "Continue, Private." "Sir, the Queen's Guard is an active military posting, not a ceremonial role. We are responsible for the protection of the royal family and key government facilities. Every man on this detail is a combat veteran, with specialized training in threat assessment and response." The colonel turned back to Marcus, whose face had grown noticeably pale. "You see, Mr. Thompson, these aren't actors in costumes. These are elite soldiers who have earned their positions through service, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to duty." Marcus tried to recover his earlier bravado. "Look, I didn't mean any disrespect. I just wanted to photograph. Surely there's some way we can work this out? I'm willing to make a substantial donation to the military charity of your choice." "How substantial?" Colonel Harrison asked, his tone suddenly businesslike. Marcus's eyes lit up. Finally, he thought, we're getting somewhere. $10,000 American. To any military charity you name. The colonel appeared to consider this offer carefully. He walked slowly around Marcus, examining him from head to toe like a drill sergeant inspecting a new recruit. The crowd watched in fascination as the tension built. $10,000, the colonel mused aloud. That's quite generous. "Tell me, what do you do for a living, Mr. Thompson?" "I own several businesses," Marcus replied, his confidence returning. manufacturing, shipping, hospitality. I employ over 300 people. Successful man, the colonel observed. And I imagine you expect loyalty from your employees. Absolutely. Loyalty is everything in business. I couldn't agree more, Colonel Harrison said, with a slight smile. Loyalty is indeed everything. Private Mitchell, this gentleman has made a very generous offer. What are your thoughts? Private Mitchell's response was immediate and unwavering. Sir, my loyalty is not for sale at any price. My oath was to Queen and country, not to the highest bidder. Admirable, the colonel said, nodding approvingly. But Mr. Thompson raises an interesting point about charity. Perhaps we can find a way to accommodate his generous spirit. Marcus felt a surge of triumph. He had been right all along. Everyone had a price, even these stuffy British military types. It had just taken finding the right approach. Excellent, Marcus said, pulling out his checkbook. Just tell me which charity, and I'll write the check right now. Colonel Harrison raised his hand. Not so fast, Mr. Thompson. I said we might accommodate your generosity, not your request for a photograph. You see, there's a significant difference between charitable donation and attempted bribery. The smile faded from Marcus's face. What do you mean? I mean, the colonel said, his voice taking on a harder edge, that while we appreciate your offer of charitable contribution, we cannot and will not compromise the integrity of the Queen's Guard for any amount of money. But you just said I said we could accommodate your generosity, the colonel interrupted. Private Mitchell, what is the standard protocol for handling attempted bribery of a member of the Queen's Guard? Private Mitchell's response was crisp and immediate. Sir, attempted bribery of a member of Her Majesty's forces is a serious offense under both military and civilian law. Standard protocol is to detain the individual and contact the appropriate authorities. Marcus felt his throat go dry. Wait, hold on. I wasn't bribing anyone. I was just offering a business arrangement. A mutually beneficial transaction with what you believed to be a ceremonial guard, Colonel Harrison pointed out. But as you now know, Private Mitchell is a serving soldier. Your business arrangement constitutes attempted bribery of a military officer, which carries serious legal consequences. The crowd of tourists had grown considerably during the confrontation, and Marcus suddenly realized how many people were now taking photos and videos of the scene. His face burned with embarrassment as he imagined these images spreading across social media. Panic began to set in as Marcus realized the gravity of his situation. What had started as a simple attempt to get an exclusive photograph was rapidly turning into a potential legal nightmare. He looked around at the crowd of tourists, many of whom were now filming the entire exchange with their phones. Now wait just a minute, Marcus said, his voice rising with desperation. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I'm an American citizen, and I have rights. I was just being friendly, making conversation. Colonel Harrison pulled out a small notepad from his pocket and began writing. Name and passport number, please. I don't have to give you anything, Marcus replied. But his voice lacked conviction. I want to speak to someone from the American embassy, immediately. That can certainly be arranged, the colonel said calmly. After we complete the proper paperwork, of course. Private Mitchell, please signal for additional personnel. Private Mitchell made a subtle hand gesture, and within moments 2 more guards appeared from nearby positions. Unlike the ceremonial guards that tourists usually saw, these men were clearly military police. They wore different uniforms and carried equipment that suggested they were prepared for more than just crowd control. Marcus felt trapped. The circle of onlookers had grown larger, and he could hear multiple conversations in different languages as people tried to explain to their companions what was happening. A few tourists were already posting updates to social media, and Marcus realized that this embarrassing incident would likely be documented online within minutes. Look, can we discuss this privately? Marcus pleaded, glancing nervously at the cameras pointed in his direction. I'm sure we can work something out like reasonable adults. I thought you believed in public negotiations. Colonel Harrison replied with a slight smile. After all, you made your offers quite openly in front of all these witnesses. One of the military police officers stepped forward. Sir, shall I escort Mr. Thompson to the security office for processing? The colonel held up a hand. In a moment, Sergeant. I believe Mr. Thompson has something he'd like to say first. Marcus looked around desperately, searching for any friendly face in the crowd, any sign of support. Instead, he saw disapproval, curiosity, and in some cases, barely concealed amusement. The elderly British woman who had first spoken up was shaking her head sadly, and several parents were using the scene as a teaching moment for their children. I apologize, Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize the seriousness of what I was doing. I thought. I made assumptions that were clearly wrong. Louder, please, Colonel Harrison requested. I think everyone would like to hear your apology. Marcus's face burned with humiliation, but he raised his voice. I apologize for my behavior. I was wrong to try to bribe the guard. I didn't understand that these are real soldiers doing important work, and the colonel prompted. Marcus looked confused. And what? And what have you learned from this experience? The question felt like something a parent might ask a misbehaving child, which made Marcus's embarrassment even more acute. He was a successful businessman, used to commanding respect and deference. Now he was being lectured in front of a crowd of strangers like a schoolboy. I learned that money can't buy everything. Gosh, Marcus said through gritted teeth. And that I should respect military service and tradition. Excellent, Colonel Harrison said, closing his notepad. Now, about that charitable donation you mentioned. Marcus looked up hopefully. Perhaps there was still a way to salvage something positive from this disaster. Yes, of course. $10,000 to whatever military charity you choose. Actually, the colonel said with a wicked smile, I was thinking of a different kind of contribution to the Queen's Guard. What did you have in you mean? Marcus asked suspiciously. Well, you seem to have a lot of opinions about how we do things here. Perhaps you'd benefit from a more hands-on understanding of military discipline and protocol. Marcus didn't like the sound of that at all. I'm not sure I follow. Colonel Harrison gestured to the military police officers. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Thompson to the guardhouse. He's volunteered to experience a day in the life of a Queen's Guard. Wait, what? Marcus protested as the officers moved toward him. I never volunteered for anything. Nonsense, the colonel replied cheerfully. You expressed such interest in what we do here. Surely a successful businessman like yourself would appreciate the opportunity for professional development. The crowd began to murmur with excitement. This was turning out to be much more entertaining than they had expected. Several tourists moved closer to get better photos of what appeared to be the next phase of Marcus's punishment. This is ridiculous, Marcus sputtered. You can't force me to do anything. I'm not subject to military discipline. You're quite right, Colonel Harrison agreed. We can't force you. But we can certainly escort you to the proper authorities for processing those bribery charges. The choice is yours. Spend the day learning about military service, or spend considerably longer learning about the British legal system. Marcus looked back and forth between the colonel and the military police officers, realizing he was facing what business people call a lose-lose proposition. Either choice would be humiliating, but one would at least be over by evening. Fine, he said reluctantly. One day. But I want it clearly understood that I'm doing this voluntarily to avoid any legal complications, of course, the colonel said with obvious satisfaction. Sergeant Williams, please take our volunteer to supply for proper fitting, as the military police officers gently but firmly took Marcus by the arms. He had one last moment of defiance. This is outrageous, he called out to the crowd. Wait until my lawyers hear about this. Oh, I'm quite looking forward to that conversation, Colonel Harrison replied. I do hope they have a good sense of humor. 2 hours later, Marcus Thompson stood in the guardhouse looking like a completely different person. The expensive Italian suit had been replaced with an ill-fitting red tunic, black trousers, and the famous bearskin hat that felt impossibly heavy on his head. The transformation was so complete that he barely recognized himself in the mirror. The uniform doesn't make the soldier, Sergeant Williams observed, adjusting Marcus's collar with military precision. But it's a start. Now let's discuss your duties for the day. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the unfamiliar clothing. The boots were too tight, the jacket too loose, and the hat kept sliding forward over his eyes. "How do you people function in these outfits?" "Practice and discipline," the sergeant replied. "Two things you're about to learn a great deal about." The door opened and Colonel Harrison entered, followed by Private Mitchell. The young guard had been relieved from his post and was now part of Marcus's impromptu training team. "How are we progressing?" the colonel asked, circling Marcus like a drill instructor examining a new recruit. "Sir?" "The subject shows promise but requires significant work on posture, bearing, and attitude," Sergeant Williams reported with a straight face. Marcus bristled at being referred to as the subject, but decided to keep his complaints to himself. The sooner he got through this humiliation, the sooner he could return to his hotel and put this entire experience behind him. "Excellent," the colonel said. "Private Mitchell, please demonstrate the proper guard stance for our volunteer." "Private." Mitchell moved to the center of the room and assumed the famous, motionless position that Marcus had tried so hard to break earlier. His back was perfectly straight, his rifle held at exactly the right angle, his eyes focused on a distant point. It was like watching a statue come to life. "Your turn," Sergeant Williams said to Marcus. Marcus attempted to copy the stance, but immediately it was clear that he had no idea what he was doing. His shoulders sagged, his rifle wavered, he couldn't seem to find the right place to focus his eyes. "Terrible," the colonel declared. "Private Mitchell, what are the key elements of proper guard bearing?" "Sir, proper bearing requires complete focus. Physical discipline, mental preparation, an unwavering dedication to duty regardless of external distractions." "External distractions," the colonel repeated meaningfully. "Such as tourists offering bribes?" "Yes, sir. Such distractions are tests of character and commitment." Marcus was beginning to understand that this entire exercise was designed to teach him a lesson about respect and discipline. Part of him admired the elegance of the punishment. It was creative, educational, and far more memorable than simply being arrested and fined. "Now," Sergeant Williams said, "we're going to practice standing at attention for 30 minutes without moving." 30 minutes? Marcus protested. "That's impossible. Nobody can stand perfectly still for 30 minutes. Private Mitchell does it for 2 hours at a time," the colonel pointed out. "Surely a successful businessman can manage 30 minutes. They positioned Marcus in the center of the room and gave him detailed instructions on where to place his feet, how to hold his rifle, and where to direct his gaze. Then they left him alone to experience what it felt like to be a Queen's Guard. The first 5 minutes weren't too bad. Marcus was motivated by pride and determination to prove that he could handle whatever they threw at him. But by the 10-minute mark, his legs were beginning to ache, and the heavy bearskin hat was making his neck sore. By 15 minutes, Marcus was discovering muscles he didn't know he had. His shoulders burned, his back ached, and he was fighting the urge to shift his weight from one foot to the other. Sweat was beginning to form under the heavy uniform, and he realized with growing respect how difficult this job actually was. At 20 minutes, Marcus was ready to quit. The physical discomfort was bad enough, but the mental challenge was even worse. Keeping his mind focused while his body screamed for movement required a type of discipline he had never experienced. In boardrooms, he could move around, gesture, pace, and use his physical presence to command attention. Standing perfectly still felt like torture. When the 30 minutes were finally over, Marcus collapsed into a nearby chair, gasping as if he had run a marathon. "Well?" Colonel Harrison asked. "How was your first lesson in military discipline?" "Horrible," Marcus admitted honestly. "I don't know how they do it." "It's much harder than it looks." "Indeed it is," the colonel agreed. "And Private Mitchell makes it look easy because he's spent years developing the physical and mental strength required. It's not just about standing still. It's about maintaining perfect alertness and readiness while appearing completely calm." Marcus looked at Private Mitchell with newfound respect. The young soldier had endured his earlier attempts at bribery without showing any sign of strain or annoyance. That level of self-control was actually quite impressive. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Marcus said slowly. "This isn't just ceremonial, is it? You're actually on guard duty. Real security work? Exactly, the colonel confirmed. Every man in this unit is trained to respond to genuine threats while maintaining the traditional appearance that tourists expect. It requires exceptional skill and discipline, and I was asking him to throw all that away for money, Marcus realized with growing embarrassment. Yes, Private Mitchell spoke up. You were asking me to betray everything I've worked for, everything I believe in, for a photograph. Marcus sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the full impact of what he had done. In his business world, everything was negotiable. Every person had a price, and every situation could be resolved with the right financial incentive. But he was learning that some things, honor, duty, loyalty, couldn't be purchased. I owe you a real apology, Marcus said to Private Mitchell. Not the public one I gave earlier, but a genuine apology from someone who finally understands what he was asking you to do. Private. Mitchell nodded acknowledgement but didn't smile. Military bearing was still in effect, even during this unusual training session. The final phase of Marcus's education took place outside, where a small crowd had gathered after word spread about the American businessman who was being taught a lesson by the Queen's Guard. Colonel Harrison had decided that if Marcus was going to learn about duty and service, he should experience it in front of the same audience that had witnessed his earlier behavior. Right then, the colonel announced, Mr. Thompson will now complete his training by standing a proper guard duty shift. 30 minutes in full view of the public, maintaining perfect military bearing. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Standing still in the privacy of the guardhouse had been difficult enough, but doing it in front of dozens of tourists with cameras felt overwhelming. However, he had come too far to back down now. They positioned him at a ceremonial post near the palace gates, the Private Mitchell standing at attention nearby to provide a standard of comparison. The contrast was immediately obvious. Private Mitchell looked like a professional soldier, while Marcus looked like someone wearing a costume to a fancy dress party. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus discovered that the physical challenges of standing guard were nothing compared to the mental ones. Tourists approached him just as they had approached Private Mitchell earlier, trying to make him laugh, asking questions, and taking countless photographs. A few even recognized him from the earlier incident and made pointed comments about his change of circumstances. Look, it's the American who tried to bribe the guard, one teenager said loudly to his friends. Now he's got to do the job himself, Karma. An elderly woman observed with obvious satisfaction. A group of college students began taking selfies with Marcus in the background, treating him like part of the tourist attraction. He could hear them discussing whether he was a real guard or some kind of punishment detail. And their speculations were both accurate and humiliating. But gradually, something began to change in Marcus's attitude. As the minutes passed and he maintained his position despite the comments, the cameras, and the physical discomfort, he started to feel a small sense of accomplishment. For the first time in his adult life, he was doing something purely for the sake of doing it well. Not for money, or recognition, or personal advantage. When a small child approached and asked his mother if the new guard would wave, Marcus felt an unexpected surge of pride in maintaining his position. The discipline required wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional as well. Every tourist interaction was a test of his ability to remain focused on his duty rather than his own comfort or embarrassment. Halfway through his shift, Marcus noticed Private Mitchell watching him with something that might have been approval. The young soldier's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was a subtle nod that suggested Marcus was finally beginning to understand what real service meant as his 30-minute shift came to an end. Marcus realized that he didn't want to disappoint the people who had invested time in teaching him this lesson. He maintained his position until Colonel Harrison formally relieved him, then executed what he hoped was a passable military salute. The small crowd that had gathered actually applauded as Marcus stepped down from his post. The applause wasn't mocking or sarcastic, it was genuine appreciation for someone who had completed a difficult challenge with dignity. Well done, Colonel Harrison said quietly as they walked back toward the guardhouse. I think you're beginning to understand what we do here. Marcus nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by the experience. I understand that I made a complete fool of myself this morning, and that your soldiers deserve a lot more respect than I showed. Indeed they do, the colonel agreed. But more importantly, you've learned something about the difference between price and value. Private Mitchell's integrity isn't expensive, it's priceless. As Marcus changed back into his civilian clothes, he found himself thinking about the young guard who had withstood his crude attempts at bribery with such grace and professionalism. In the business world, Marcus was used to people who could be bought, influenced, or intimidated. Meeting someone whose principles were genuinely non-negotiable had been a humbling experience. Before leaving the palace grounds, Marcus approached Private Mitchell one final time. The guard was back at his regular post. Having resumed his duties after the unusual training session, "I know you can't respond," Marcus said quietly, "but I wanted you to know that you taught me something important today. About honor, about service, and about things that matter more than money." He placed an envelope at the base of the guard post. Not money this time, but a handwritten letter of apology and a donation check made out to a military veterans charity that he had researched on his phone. As Marcus walked away from Buckingham Palace, he could feel the eyes of tourists and guards alike following his departure. Word of the incident had spread throughout the day, and he knew that videos and photos of his humiliation were probably already circulating on social media. In 12 hours, he would be on a plane back to Texas, where he would have to face questions from colleagues and friends who had undoubtedly seen the coverage. But strangely, Marcus found that he wasn't as concerned about his reputation as he thought he would be. The experience had given him something he hadn't expected: perspective. For years, he had prided himself on his ability to make deals, to find every person's price, to use money as a tool to get whatever he wanted. Today, he had learned that some things simply weren't for sale. Colonel Harrison watched from a window as Marcus Thompson disappeared into the crowd of tourists, heading toward the palace gates. The colonel had seen many different types of people attempt to test his guards over the years, but few had shown the capacity for genuine learning that the American businessman had demonstrated, sir, Private Mitchell said, approaching with the envelope Marcus had left behind. The gentleman left this. The colonel opened the letter and read it quickly, then showed it to the young guard. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, clearly composed with thought and sincerity. "Private Mitchell, I want to apologize not just for my behavior today, but for my complete failure to understand what you represent. You and your fellow guards are the embodiment of values that I had forgotten existed: duty, honor, and integrity that cannot be purchased at any price. I have enclosed a donation to help support veterans who have served with the same dedication you show every day. Thank you for teaching me that some things are indeed priceless." Marcus Thompson, Private Mitchell, read the letter twice, then looked up at his commanding officer. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted." I think he finally got it, sir. Understanding what we do here, why we do it. "Yes," Colonel Harrison agreed. "I believe he did. It's unfortunate that it took such dramatic measures to teach the lesson, but some people learn better through experience than through explanation." As the afternoon wore on, and the incident became part of palace folklore, the guards resumed their normal duties. But the story of the American businessman who tried to bribe a queen's guard and ended up learning about honor and service would be told and retold for years to come. Private Mitchell returned to his post, standing as straight and still as he had that morning, his rifle perfectly positioned, his eyes focused on the distance. But now he carried with him the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, even in the most unlikely circumstances, it was possible to change someone's understanding of what really mattered in life. The tourists continued to come and go, taking their photographs and making their jokes, testing the guards' legendary composure with silly faces and loud noises. But none of them would make quite the impression that Marcus Thompson had made, not because he had succeeded in his original goal, but because he had ultimately failed so completely and learned so much in the process. As the sun began to set over London, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard, the story of the bribe that backfired had already begun its transformation from embarrassing incident to valuable lesson. Marcus Thompson had come to London looking for a trophy photograph to impress his business associates. Instead, he had discovered something far more valuable: the knowledge that true worth cannot be measured in dollars and cents. The Queen's Guard continued their eternal vigil, as they had for centuries, protecting not just the royal family, but the ideals of duty, honor, and service that they represented. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, a wealthy American businessman was beginning to understand that the most important things in life are indeed the ones that money cannot buy.